Hello, this is Professor Gifford, and today we will be talking and thinking about the comparison-contrast essay. Now, you might have noticed that the first essay, we looked a lot at the thesis statement. How do we control an essay using three subpoints in a thesis statement? In our case, it was classification. There are three classes of blank. Then the next essay, which was the cause essay, you'll notice that we talked a little bit more about topic sentences, making certain that each topic sentence kept the paper on topic. One cause for the recent economic activity is A. Another cause for the recent economic activity is B. And a third reason for the economic activity is C. Now, I've been asking you to fill in the A, B's, and C's because it truly is your opinion that makes this paper interesting. If I were to just ask you to write a report on a person or a company or a leader, the paper wouldn't necessarily tell me much about your ideas of the man, right? Report just gives me all of the facts that are based upon biographical data, secondhand accounts, all of the things that you would be able to research and find out. What I'm trying to show you in the third paper is that each of the statements you make and each of the assertions you make about comparison-contrast, and this goes back to cause as well, about cause and about classification, you need to connect to the mode of rhetoric in your body paragraphs. Do not, and I underline this 3 or 4 times, do not simply present all of the facts on, for example, one person. If you were comparing Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, do not put all of the details or biographical information about Kobe Bryant down and then talk about all of the details of Michael Jordan and expect it to be a comparison paper. I'm not looking for research that does not suit the mode of rhetoric. Anything that you express about Michael Jordan should immediately be compared and expressed about Kobe Bryant. So if you're talking about their amazing playoff presence, and you say that Michael Jordan scored 42 points in the 7th game of the 1997 finals, and I have no idea if he did, you then have to immediately compare that presence with something from Kobe Bryant's life. Don't just tell me everything that Kobe did and everything that Michael did and expect me to line up the evidence. That's not a comparison paper. That is you writing 2 reports and asking me to put together all the information for you. A comparison paper, you use the same thesis statement structure. You use the same body paragraph topic sentence structure. However, you need to make certain that each point that you bring up about one comparison item that you are comparing is immediately paired with information from the second item. Now, items can mean comparing 2 books, comparing 2 people, so item might be a little bit inexact. Excuse me for that. This is very important now because I've been noticing in your cause papers and in your classification papers, you stumble a bit on content and research. Many of you do. Some of you are getting past it, but some of you need to do a lot more to show that you understand the mode of rhetoric that you're writing in. I graded a few cause papers that had wonderful topic sentences and a very good thesis statement, but then never connected in the body paragraph any of the information that they put into their paper to the idea of cause of leadership, cause of financial distress, cause of anything. And that's very distracting to find all of the elements of a cause paper except for the content, which then goes on just to basically be report-like information. We need to get away from the book report idea and get to the idea of opinionated essays, meticulously backed up with research, and transitions that show me exactly how you are planning on comparing or contrasting your topic. Let's get to some of those things. Terminology. This is something you can look in your book, but I'll bring it up in lecture as well. Very often in a contrast paper, contrast, of course, means talking about the differences between two things. You will use things like in contrast, despite, different from, conversely. So you're basically setting up your paper with some of these words and transitions that can help you describe differences. This way, when you are writing, every time you use in contrast or in contrast to, it forces you to contrast, because the sentence doesn't make sense if you start out with in contrast to and you don't find something different. And I think even if you're not a very savvy essay writer, you'll notice that in your sentence. You'll say, okay, I started out with conversely, therefore I need to go on and describe something that's different about this other part. Something that is very important about this essay is that you use point-by-point method. That means that when you bring up one point about your topic, your first topic, you immediately either compare or contrast it to the other topic. So if you are contrasting, for example, Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, our favorite musicians in class, or how about Lady Gaga? Let's go with Lady Gaga. She's big. You're contrasting Britney Spears and Lady Gaga, and you might want to say in the first body paragraph, they are different in their style, their dress, their manner of dress. Lady Gaga is into creating styles and being a fashion template for a lot of people who are in the musical world and in the fashion world. Whereas, see, I use a transition that says something different's coming. Whereas Britney Spears was almost always a pop icon, always feeding into the same kind of mystique of a pop princess, really. Everything about her was very pretty. Everything about her was very glamorous. I don't think you see the same thing with Lady Gaga, although I'm not an expert on Lady Gaga. But what I'm saying is, and the important point to take out of this, I know you've been waiting, is that if you bring up one thing about style for Lady Gaga, immediately go to the contrast in Britney Spears. The next thing you might bring up about Lady Gaga is that she is primarily a musician. She plays her own music. She does her own arrangements in some circumstances. And for Britney Spears, she was primarily a performer. And maybe that contrast gets you somewhere interesting as well. But do not give me a long narrative or report narrative on Lady Gaga, and then in the next paragraph give me a long report narrative on Britney Spears in block method, basically, and expect me to line up all of the differences. That is not the way contrast works, especially in this class. I want you to do point by point. Bring up a point about Christina Aguilera, or bring up a point about Britney Spears, and then immediately bring up a point about Lady Gaga. Getting away from Lady Gaga, you can go to Stephen Jobs and Bill Gates. Bring up a point about the innovation of Bill Gates, and maybe compare it to the innovative parts of Steve Jobs. Let's say innovation is something you're going to compare each other on. You talk about how the Windows changed the way the operating system for most of computers on the planet. And then immediately you say, likewise, or similarly, Stephen Jobs changed the way we listen to music just as much as Bill Gates changed the interface with a computer. Stephen Jobs changed our interface to media on the computer. Well, that sounds like a very strong comparison, and I did it. And of course, each of those points is going to need research to back them up. So behind the Windows idea, I need to find out how many Windows systems were sold in 1995 when the first pretty, functional version of Windows came out. And then I need to find out how many iPods have been sold throughout the iPod brand name, however long the iPod brand has been out. I can't tell you that either. but I will be able to tell you about it before I write the essay. And in the essay, I will be able to tell you where I get those sources, put parenthetical citations afterwards, and then put a correct works cited page at the end. I hope what you're getting from this is that once you build up a thesis, and then once you build up a topic sentence, the next stage is to show that you understand how to write the opinions of your essay inside the body paragraphs. List all of the similarities of style you want to bring up between your two works in this case, or two people in some cases, or two leaders in some cases, or two things in some cases. And when you've decided that, for example, you want to talk about, let's say, writing style, main character issues with their parents, and story arc, the general story arc, and you want to compare one book to another, I want you to dig into each of those different parts, each of those body paragraphs, find out what's similar, and compare them right up against each other. In this book, this shows a style type that is, for example, stream of consciousness, something Joyce did. And then in the other book, if you find elements of stream of consciousness, find the page numbers, quote the page numbers, show how those two books actually relate, find another source outside of the books that says that much of Steve Martin's success has been based upon stream of consciousness writing, if you have these two books in case, or if you were choosing another book, Dostoevsky, or who's my favorite? I've got to say, I do love Vonnegut. You can't go wrong with Joyce. I've already brought him up, though, so I feel like I'm kind of cheating at this point. So each of these things need to be brought up side by side, and you need to show me you're comparing them. Look at the terms on page 87 of your book. They will help you produce a comparison or contrast, and they will help you keep together your two topics so that you don't break them apart and forget that it's comparison paper or forget that it's a contrast paper and just report information, because that's not the mode of rhetoric of comparison contrast. Just to sum up, a quick summary. Comparison is finding similarities between two things. Contrast is finding differences between two things. We get a thesis statement that defines 3 areas of comparison or 3 areas of contrast. We go down to the body paragraph level. We state that we are going to compare, and we don't use we, of course. That's first person. Stay away from first and second person. You know this. We are going to compare these two things based upon this. Filling in the blanks. We're going to compare The Pleasure of My Company and Notes from the Underground based upon writing style. Then you go into the body and prove it. Find different examples of writing style similarities in each of the works and show me those sections. Then find other people that believe in that comparison, that they think it's a valid one. Find psychologists or historians that will talk about how that time period when the book was published was well known for Romanticism, scientific expressionism, Freudianism, any of the things that you might bring up in a paper that says, for example, Daniel in Pleasure of My Company has some issues with his sexuality and with his parents, and you could definitely delve into the psychological components of his behavior and his character. Anyway, each of the body paragraphs, we look for those comparisons or contrasts. We get to the conclusion, the first sentence of the conclusion, we restate the thesis, we broaden out into a call to action or perhaps a future prediction. These are ways to bring people in. Now, I didn't just do this paper because I find these two books or these two people interesting. I did it because I want to show how much you can equate the writing of one person 300 years ago or 1,000 years ago to the writing of someone in our backyard in Southern California in our time. Now, that doesn't sound like a grand point, but in a way it is. The fact that someone shares commonalities over 1,000 years, isn't that kind of an interesting way to leave the reader? Or, to contrast, to say that two very popular books or two very interesting people got where they were going by completely different routes. The fact that you don't have to be the same person in order to make a difference in the world. You can be different. And in fact, in some arts and some performance circles, it almost is encouraged and needed that you are going to be different. And that's kind of a cool topic as well. Get to that. You finish up the paper. You turn it in by 11:59. And remember, this paper is worth almost as much, well, in fact, exactly as much as the first two papers combined. So we're trying to make this into something where you started out with lower grades that are less important to your final grade, and as we get further into the class, I expect more of you, and I give you higher grade totals so that you can make up for some of the beginning assignments if, for example, you came into the class and it was very hard to do some of the original assignments. Well, by now, you should be getting it, and you should be producing on the level of MO1A, and you can start getting the grades that I think you deserve. Well, from the hills above Stevenson Ranch, this is Professor Gifford signing off.